I love Africa, and I love Africans. Yes, I said it again, and it's why I'm here. It's why this conference is here in Washington, D.C., and why our government is committed to a mission to work with Africans in Africa to better the energy systems of your country. That's the same thing we want to do in our country and the same thing we want to do around the world. And the reason is energy is life. The absence of energy is poverty, despair, and ultimately death. Millions of people die every year from the cold because they don't have heating resources to survive. We have in Africa roughly 1 million people every year dying from indoor air pollution from the lack of clean cooking fuel. And the time saving and the liberation, think of women in society gathering fuels, hours a day, there's danger, there's time, there's risk in that, and then indoor air pollution. All of the world, everyone lived that way just a few generations ago. The transformation is recent. And until the arrival of modern energy, global life expectancy at birth was around 30 years, from before the invention of agriculture and just 200 years ago. Global life expectancy at birth was 30 years. It's dramatically higher than that in every country on earth, including the poorest countries in the world. That transformation is because we have massively more energy resources today that have made our lives better, that have allowed us to live longer, wealthier, more broad capabilities, more joy-filled lives. We're not just scraping for existence. Energy is that transformational force. When I think of energy, and I think when we all think of energy, we should just think of it through the lens of two things. Humans, the only reason we produce energy, the only reason we're trying to get investments is to make our lives better, to make everyone that lives in our communities, our towns, our countries' lives better. Energy is about improving human lives, and then it's about math. In our circumstances, in our setting, what are the greatest return investments we can make to improve lives the most? That's what has transformed the world over the last several generations. And I think it's critical that everywhere, not just Africa, everywhere, including in this country, that we focus on that. I must make one comment. I look at that map of Africa, it warms my heart to see that place I love so much and that I can't wait to go again in July this year. And it's covered in wind turbines and solar panels. Those are energy sources. They're a subset of energy sources. When I was born, about 80 to 85% of all global energy came from oil, coal, and natural gas. Today, 80 to 85% of all energy in the world, including right here in the United States, comes from oil, coal, and natural gas. It has not changed in my entire lifetime. And the prospects of it changing meaningfully in the rest of my life are almost nil. So to not have the energies that make the modern world even appear on the map of Africa disturbs me. And I know the previous administration, I know many governments around the world have had a paternalistic, I call it neo-colonial attitude that we're going to tell you how you should power Africa. I find this deeply wrong and deeply offensive. In the United States, in Europe, and in Asia, we spent $10 trillion on wind turbines, solar panels, batteries, and all the huge transmission lines that are needed to connect diffuse resources. $10 trillion. They provided last year 2.6% of global energy. 2.6%. In the United States, 3.0%. And everywhere they have a very high politically driven penetration, we have higher electricity prices, lower standards of living for people, and out-migration. California is our leader there. They have the highest adjusted poverty rate of any state in the United States, the land of opportunity, this land of wealth and opportunity, by somehow viewing energy through some moral compass, some environmental compass. Let's just do the math. Nothing that Africa does on its energy systems in all of our lifetimes will have any meaningful impact on global greenhouse gas emissions. It will not matter. But it will matter massively, massively to the lives of Africans. If you can grow the availability of clean cooking fuel, of electricity, and bring industry and jobs, you can absolutely transform the opportunities and lives of Africans. That's the lens we must look at energy in Africa. What is best for Africans? It will be different answers in different countries. I'm not saying there's good ones and bad ones, but don't look at through a silly lens that the West got drunk on and somehow believed we were going to change the globe by spending $10 trillion, and we got almost zero impact on global greenhouse gas emissions for $10 trillion. Nothing meaningful. We just made energy more expensive. We pushed factories out of Germany and the United Kingdom and California, and we sent them to Asia. That didn't help the environment. That didn't solve climate change. It just hurt people that lived in the communities where these malinvestments were made. I'll go to the upbeat part. First of all, congratulations. Africa has gone to an increasing focus, a great focus on clean cooking fuel. And I think you all have rightly identified this is the greatest bang for the buck. We have the technology. We know the road to get here. We can transform the quality of life for the communities across Africa. We can truly liberate women from hours of drudgery every day. We can improve their lives and change the prospects for their children and lift up communities. We can do that. We know how to do it. And I get emotional reading the statements from so many African countries about this commitment to this effort to get clean cooking fuels to the over 80% of Africans that don't have them today. God bless you for those statements. God bless you for those commitments. And that refocusing, I think, on issues that are real and that are solvable and that will change people's lives. I say on that as well, those statements are awesome and they are a necessary opening of that door. But what matters now is action. Action. Just great thoughts, great words, those are important, but they're nowhere near enough. Now we need, most importantly in Africa, but the US wants to be your partner. I personally want to be your partner. We want to lean in to deliver action to make it happen. It is hard. There's a reason they're not widespread today. It's hard. It requires changing the business conditions, the availability of capital, the distribution networks. There's things that are large scale at government level, but ultimately the hardest challenge by far is the last mile delivery, is how do you get an LPG canister to remote villages in a sustainable economic way. That's a challenge, but Africans are tough, inventive, full of love, full of ingenuity. It's a challenge that can, shall, and must be solved. And we need to move fast. We need to sit here next year and say, look at all the progress that's going. 10 years from now, we want to feel hundreds of millions of people's lives have been changed, not because of our words, but because of our actions and what we did. It will be tricky. It will be hard, but if you visit families, and I know you all have, and you see that transformation that's possible, let's make that happen together. But we have to stay focused on people and math, not take the politics, take the virtue signaling, take the whatever out of energy. It's just too important for humans to go that direction. Look, we have the same challenge in the United States. We've made massive malinvestments in energy in our country. We made energy more expensive. We pushed a lot of our industries overseas. We are not perfect. We are far from perfect. But we also have the same challenges. In rural America, we run on LPG. In our cities and tighter population densities, we have underground pipelines that deliver natural gas. But tens of millions of Americans don't have that. We have the same challenge. And it took us, it was not long ago, it took us investment, businesses, changing of regulations, enabling of things to happen so that all the farms and small towns and remote communities across the United States, I have a wonderful, I'm super lucky guy, I have a wonderful vacation house in Montana. It runs on LPG. I don't have gas pipelines there. It runs on LPG. A truck delivers LPG to our house. That's how we cook, that's how we heat, that's how we live. That's just the nature of infrastructure. And I'm going to invite my great friend, and I'm so proud to have Raj and the Rockefeller Foundation as our partners, as they have worked on big challenges around the world. And a growing partnership we have to be, again, your partners. You're the leaders. You're going to decide what happens and how it works. But we are all in to be as helpful as we can in as many ways as possible. But God bless you all. I love Africa, and I love Africans.
Thank you, Secretary Wright, for those opening comments and for just making the time to be here and to be so passionate about your commitment to fighting energy poverty and expanding clean cooking in Africa. And I just want to ask, I want to start with a sort of personal question. Now you're the Secretary of Energy. Congratulations. and we admire the office and the role that you encumber. But your commitment to fighting energy poverty in Africa, and in particular addressing clean cooking, started well before this role. Could you just tell us a little bit about how you got interested in, aware of, and committed to the mission you just spoke about?
Well, that's a long question, but real quick, look, I was born middle class in Denver, Colorado. Super lucky, right? I'm born in the United States of America in the second half of the 20th century to a middle class family, a two-parent family, just like I won the lottery. Then my dad, I only went to my dad's office once in my life, and I saw a homeless person on the street. You know, at 12 or 13 years old, I didn't know anything about substance abuse or mental illness. I just couldn't believe there was someone who didn't have a roof over his head, didn't know where his next meal was coming from. And that started a lifelong passion on poverty. You know, why were some people lucky and living in great circumstances and others not? My view of what that is changed dramatically through my life. But I realized early on, as you looked through history, the transformation of societies came from energy. Which is why I've spent my whole life in business in energy. And then when I look at all of the energy sources and transformations that have happened, I say look, I first worked in solar, I worked in nuclear, I worked in geothermal. Like I don't have, none of my family was in the oil and gas business. It's only my awesome wife who is the reason at a relatively young age I also got into that business. But energy just transforms societies and lives. And I think the biggest step in progress from abject poverty to crazy wealth, that is a long road. The biggest single step is the transformation from traditional fuels to clean cooking fuels. Wow. To me, there's no greater bang for the buck than getting that one done.
Well, let's talk about that. You've led efforts to make that happen on the continent and around the world. The Clean Cooking Accelerator is an initiative that the Rockefeller Foundation is a part of. From your role as secretary, what's your vision for how clean cooking can become more the baseline and not just available to the relatively small, I think 20% of households you made reference to?
As we said, it's a logistics problem, right? Which to me means lots of small businesses, lots of entrepreneurs, maybe some bigger business doing long distance transport, but it's a logistics problem. So it very much requires a government environment that's receptive to investment, that won't make it hard for entrepreneurs to do different things, that'll build the necessary infrastructure to import on large scale and store it. So it's going to be business number one. I'm definitely going to make it in the Department of Energy, and I hope at some level in the U.S. government, our biggest Africa policy focus of this administration. That's my, thank you.
I think that deserves a round of applause. At an energy summit, that deserves a round of applause. Thank you.
Yes, that to me is the, look, there's a lot of things, and we have a lot of business interests in Africa, critical minerals, alliances, things across the board. There are a lot of things we want to do with Africa, but the single biggest one, if I can leave after 4 years and we have rapid progress underway in clean cooking fuels, I could have done nothing else, it would be worth my 4 years.
Well, that's an amazing statement and an extraordinary public commitment, so thank you for your leadership. The Mission 300 initiative that Mokhtar and others spoke about was so powerful to be a part of, and last January I was with 27 African heads of state as they, now I think more than 30 have issued compacts, where they're laying out for the public these reforms required to do all the things you just said: welcome the private sector, protect capital invested, change the regulations to enable clean cooking and other solutions to be accessible to those that are otherwise left behind. What is your, this Clean Cooking Accelerator will of course merge with the Mission 300 effort and help, and so those resources can accelerate this push. But what else do you need African leaders to do to allow this effort to be even more successful?
Well, and I should have said, Raj, that I think Mission 300, the original vision of where it is today, is also outstanding. Look, that's another basic piece of energy infrastructure is electricity. It's harder, it's more a big business thing, it's more a big government thing to build the infrastructure for an electricity network, but transform it as well. You can't have a modern world without an electricity grid and without widespread access to electricity. That's also a great story in the United States. And again, the United States, you look at a grid today and it looks wonderful and all that. It's only the last couple generations. Like we are only two generations ahead of what's going on in Africa. And it was a major concerted effort from the public sector and private sector to build an electricity grid and hit so much of our country. We still have problems with that. We still have 10% of Americans in the last 12 months got a utility disconnection notice. Most of them did not have their electricity disconnected, but 2 or 3% of them did. And so having an affordable, reliable, secure electricity network is a challenge in the United States. It's a challenge everywhere. So again, we are learning together. We are driving forward together. But it really does take private investment, private commitment, and a government that believes not just in talking about these things, but actually seeing them happen. A lot of times big government and a vision and a narrow control over how businesses operate stifle the ability to actually do it on the ground. In the United States, we have huge investments in some states and very modest investment in other states. And that's because of political decisions those states have made. And you don't want to be that state in Africa where your government makes it so hard to register a business and has so many regulations and so much bureaucracy or corruption that your heart's in the right place, but nothing happens. It's hard to create business conditions that enable people to do things, even things you don't want them to do. You have to let the marketplace and entrepreneurs go free to make things happen. It means you lose a little control, but you cannot get positive change and transformation of people's lives without doing it. Secure rule of law and limited, less corrupt government. Those are the biggest conditions of wealth generation in all of human history everywhere.
And Mission 300 has actually delivered that since September of 2024. Thanks to those elements of policy reform, improved governance, and creating space for entrepreneurs to succeed, 44 million new connections have been brought to bear as a result of that effort. It's awesome, and it's exactly what you're describing. Part of what we've done to make that successful is the Rockefeller Foundation, the Global Energy Alliance have come together and put more than $100 million into that effort, which is, of course, a small amount relative to what the World Bank has done and what domestic investors have done. But when you look at the clean cooking space or energy poverty broadly, how would you characterize the role of philanthropy, of public-private partnership, of these kind of newer concepts of doing work together and delivering outsized results?
Yeah, Raj, I think the innovative way you've been working is essential. There was a belief, when I was a kid, first learning about why are some countries poor and others not, and the big thing was government aid, but government aid then was one government from one country gave money to a government in another country. And there was, massive amounts of that. And scholars, many of them Africans, that wrote Dambisa Moyo for one, but a number of great authors wrote, it really didn't work very well. It didn't work very well. Because the engines that drive improvement, that drive wealth creation and new economies and new energy systems, ultimately are businesses that do that. So having that public-private philanthropy to business, philanthropy to government, I think your efforts have been great because you've learned from what we saw in the past. That was all well-intentioned. It just didn't work very well, and you've innovated. You said, all right, we're going to do it differently here. What are the conditions that it takes to get things going? You've engaged with the governments to say, hey, if we can move these different conditions, we can draw capital, we can make stuff happen. Yeah. That's just smart. And at the end of the day, for clean cooking, it's going to be a small entrepreneur. The hardest part is the small entrepreneurial game in the last minute. But man, all of us have seen African entrepreneurs, the energy, the enthusiasm, how hard people will work if they believe there's a chance of success at the end. You have the essential ingredient, which is that people, that character, that thing. We've just got to have, as Raj, as you've been working on, it's a little different kind of reform needed for clean cooking fuels versus electricity, but it's the same idea. Just the conditions that'll draw capital and let people go free to build stuff. But I commend you personally and the Rockefeller Foundation for saying philanthropy is not about feeling good about yourself. It's about doing something. And that means I have to look at a lot of things I did before. I thought I was great, but what I did didn't do anything. It was completely ineffective. And we have to be able to say, well, that sounded cool, but I was just dead wrong. That didn't work. Now I'm going to try this. And we got to be willing to change and innovate and figure out what works and then double down on that.
Well, humans and math in a hyper-local way makes a lot of sense. You've also been an absolute leader in talking about what the technology frontier could mean for energy systems here in the United States and around the world. Nuclear, geothermal, you just went through a long list. What do you think of as the potential for new technologies to address energy poverty in Africa over time? And what kind of advice would you offer African leaders, private and public sector, as to how to prepare for and accelerate the use of those technologies?
Wow, great question. And again, this is, technologies change and they evolve. And fortunately, they evolve for the better. So Africa, for example, has significant parts of Africa are very sunny. It does have great solar resources. And if we can continue to drive innovation on energy storage and make it cheaper and longer lasting, places that are later to get grid connections do have resources they can harvest. I know Kenya, right off the bat, has meaningful geothermal energy. That's not going to be everywhere, but that exists. If you have local energy resources that work, go after them. And then you may be the drivers of the innovation that figures out how to make geothermal even bigger and expand. Africa has great coal resources. Coal is the largest source of electricity today in the world. It was the largest source of electricity in the world in the year 1900 and every year in between. And it will be the largest source of electricity generation when I die. And that's a long ways away. But coal has a huge lead.
I hope that is a long ways away.
It's got, but we just got to be realistic about that. Like one of the things we did here in the United States, we went on a political crusade in our country that somehow we're going to be virtuous and we're going to close our coal plants as fast as we can so we can beat our chests and say, we're fighting climate change. And the last administration closed just a crazy amount of coal plants. Well, what happened? Well, electricity prices went up 30%, and we don't produce any more electricity than we did before. So one of the things this president did, and we took a lot of heat for it, was we stopped the closure of coal plants. We kept 17 gigawatts of coal plants open, and during this, we had this very cold weather system called Fern in the end of January. In fact, the largest in extent cold snap we've had in this country, largest electricity production we've ever had, largest demand for home heating fuel we've ever had. In that storm, if we had closed all those coal plants that were supposed to have been closed, we would have seen hundreds, if not thousands, of Americans freeze to death. That's just crazy that we were that close to doing that.
Could I ask you about that concept but applied to Africa? I was just in, one of the inspirations for Mission 300 was some engagement with a program the World Bank had rolled out in northern Nigeria. And I was with rural farmers, women, who were doing agro-processing and other activity, running a small store, all using backup diesel. And I learned that the Nigerian grid, in terms of providing productive power to small businesses, 80% of it is backup diesel at 80, 90 cents a kilowatt hour. And so that gave rise to all of the space for sort of distributed renewables as a solution for places that are not connected to grids, that are remote, because the math is so favorable for them to switch. And I wonder if you could speak to that, but also, you've talked to me before, and I know we're running out of time, about the DOE labs and the huge amount of knowledge and innovation in the DOE labs. How can you see that knowledge and innovation helping these efforts in Africa?
Yeah, so by visiting our 17 labs, I've been an evangelist that you want to change the world and make people's lives better, work on energy, work on remote energy, small-scale energy, big energy. So you're right, Raj. A lot of innovations will be coming. And you made a great point. We have it in Alaskan villages, in Hawaii, in Puerto Rico. If you don't have infrastructure and you're islanded, you generally run on diesel. Well, diesel's expensive, and it burns kind of dirty. In Hawaii, they have a giant diesel, almost all the electricity is from diesel. That governor of Hawaii, Democrat, by the way, wonderful guy, he said, man, I want to make electricity cheaper in Hawaii. Well, people thought it was weird I wanted to work with Democrats. I'm like, I don't care what party you're from or where you're from. We're for America, and we're for energy. And so we have a thing in Hawaii. In Hawaii, it's large scale. So LNG on ships, which is more expensive than gas on a pipeline, is still going to lower electricity prices in Hawaii by 30%. And it's going to clean the air quality in Honolulu, in the big city, meaningfully. But as you say, in remote villages, if you want dispatchable electricity, mining operations and all that, it comes from diesel generators because they work and they're reliable, but they're very expensive. And so you attach a bunch of solar to that, and every time the sun shines, you're saving money, massive money, by burning less diesel. Home run. If you can get wind or any other generation, maybe diesel's what bridges you through the night or whatever gets the thing. But that is an awesome application of alternate energy technologies because, boy, the math works tremendously.
Yeah, that's great point to conclude on. And I'll just say thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your commitment to Africa and African energy. Thank you for being a voice for the world to remind folks that it is, in fact, energy poverty that keeps people trapped in a living state and a living condition that is less hopeful and less optimistic. And thank you for being here now 2 years in a row. Well, we welcome your partnership and your leadership. We're going to get this clean cooking project integrated in Mission 300 and get it done at scale with your leadership and support. So thank you.
Awesome. I hope next year we can celebrate some actual on-the-ground wins and we've got a ball rolling. But that's only possible with all the awesome humans in this room and with you, my friend. I'm very proud to call a friend and a partner, Raj Shah. Thank you all so much. God bless Africa.